Of course, the gun control debate will continue. Ian Samuels here, former law clerk for Justice Antonin Scalia, lecturer at Harvard Law School. Ian, it's always good to see you. Thank you. Am I onto something here?
You know, it's an interesting question. I was thinking about these felon in possession gun laws because they are a favorite tool of federal prosecutors, right? It's illegal under federal law to have a gun if you're a previously convicted felon, but states can prosecute it too, cities can prosecute it too. And the question I thought maybe I could sharpen it up with is that I was imagining a person who had a felony drug possession charge, right, that they pleaded to, maybe 5 years ago or something. And then it was like for simple marijuana possession, but it was charged at felony level. And then later that person owns a gun. Now, it's illegal, right? So you could prosecute them for doing that. But I'm actually not convinced that felon in possession maps all that neatly or convincingly onto people who are the kinds of people who shouldn't have a gun because they're dangerous, right? Now, I'm not completely convinced that it's not true, right, at all.
Well, right,
but
we use felon in possession as one example. But if you go through these DAs, there's a whole host of crimes that they choose not to prosecute. What I'm trying to understand is why you have a school shooting in Nashville and everybody is up in arms and ready for new gun laws, but you have kids dying literally every day. Multiple numbers of those kids dying on the south side of Chicago, the north side of St. Louis, the barrios of Phoenix. I could go on. And nobody cares. There's absolutely no outrage that the laws that would lock up the gangbangers who are committing these murders aren't prosecuted and aren't enforced.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly glad that you do care, and I appreciate you bringing attention to this because I care also. And the question is it's really, there's not a clear ideological valence to this, I don't think, which is which are the crimes that you do want to pour your enforcement resources into, right? Because everybody can agree that, of course, if you're actually committing a violent gun crime, no one's going to decline prosecution in that case. But what we're really getting at is there's these littler offenses, right? And the classic example from New York, as you know, is turnstile jumping, that they don't pose any danger to anybody in and of themselves, but maybe the thought goes that's a way to identify a person who might go on and do something more dangerous later. This is called broken windows policing. It doesn't have a very good reputation. But there are intermediate things that are more serious than turnstile jumping, but are not as serious as like shooting somebody. Felon in possession is a good example. Trespassing is a good example. And the question that you have to ask if you want to be a sort of pragmatic district attorney is, what are the lower level crimes that we want to focus on that are going to basically catch dangerous people before they do the really dangerous violent stuff? And now I'm not convinced that these prosecutors in these cities aren't onto something, right? Like, for example, in New York, one of the things that Alvin Bragg doesn't want to prosecute is he doesn't want to prosecute simple marijuana possession. Because
I understand. I get all this, but the data, which we're supposed to follow, proves that whatever they're doing is not working. Homicides are up 50% in some places or more. So
yeah, I'm not sure about that because homicides are up everywhere in the United States, and it's not just in the places with these reform prosecutors. And it could just as easily be sort of the other way around. But as you say, that people in these cities might see the crime.
I go back to what we said at the beginning, which is how is this situation that when you've got 3 kids who die in Nashville, there is this huge push for gun control. Yet when you have 3 kids die in a week in Chicago, there is absolutely nothing even said or brought up about the problems of crime on the south side of Chicago.
Yeah, and I very much agree with that. And the question is, if we agree, as we do, that is, I mean, it seems almost horrifically minimizing to call the death of 3 children on the south side of Chicago like a problem. It's horrible, right? The question is, well, what is to be done about it? And it's obviously not sufficient to say, well, the people who shot those children should be prosecuted and they should go to jail. That's true, but that can't bring those children back. The question is, what are you going to do to prevent it next time? And what we're sort of circling around is, which are the lower level crimes that you want to focus on? Is felon in possession one of them? Maybe, but is it maybe better to pour enforcement resources into something else? Because with felon in possession, maybe you end up picking a lot of people with nonviolent felonies up who, yeah, they shouldn't be owning a gun, but they're actually not the kind of people who are going to go on and commit violent crimes later. And the question there is just one that you do need to get further deep into the data to really answer. And I don't think it's sufficient to say, well, you have prosecutors declining prosecutions in some categories of crime. That means they're soft on crime. It's a resource allocation question, isn't it?
Well, Alvin Bragg seems to have enough resources to prosecute Donald Trump, but that's a discussion for another time, which we will have. Good to see you, as always, Ian. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.